Okay, great. Good afternoon. We're here with the Joint Legislative Management Committee. It is April 14th, and we are here to discuss the out-of-cycle wage adjustment policy. And I'll just say at the top, I've been really impressed with the work that Arlene and her shop have done on this, and I expect that we can move through this pretty quickly because of the work that's been done to prepare for this. So just to remind everybody, at our last meeting we met and we adopted the compensation structure that was developed by NCSL, which is the National Council of State Legislators. We tasked them with helping us look at our pay structure across the branch and figure out where we were in relationship to comparable jobs around the country. The process was really an attempt to resolve an issue where compensation requests and changes were taking place in isolation from each other. It was something that we as a committee were quite uncomfortable with, and it was leading to recruiting challenges, morale issues, equity issues, and basically misalignment within the industry and the job market across the branch. We're really trying to get an outside set of eyes to look at that and bring us more into alignment. So our goal for today is to review and adopt an out-of-cycle wage adjustment policy that will allow us within the legislature to move forward with implementing the recommendations from the NCSL report. As we discussed at our last meeting, it is a little strange to be adopting an out-of-cycle policy before we have a clearly established in-cycle policy. But this would help us to establish a solid baseline from which to develop a further compensation philosophy and policy around which it can be developed. So our goal is to adjust wages in order to bring staff as close to the target market rate in the structure as possible, while also staying fiscally responsible and within some guardrails that we've been looking at with our money chairs. So the speaker and I are going to give you some updates on the work we've done since our last meeting to establish guidelines for implementation, and the legislative HR director, Arlene Donovan, who you know, will once again walk us through the policy and answer some questions about implementation before we hopefully will take a vote. So Arlene is going to speak more about this in a minute, but the first element of implementation was contracting with a compensation analyst. We felt wholly unprepared to do this in-house. And so the comp analyst reviewed job descriptions, resumes, and placed individuals in the structure according to these factors using best practices across the industry. And between the expert input and the methodology of the NCSL study in creating the structure and the input from the comp analyst, the committee should have, I think, great confidence in the target market wage that was determined for each position. I hope that's the case. As we said last meeting, approaching this work within the fiscal realities of the branch is also an important issue for us, an important goal for us as we look towards implementation. So the speaker and I met with the chairs of appropriations to discuss an appropriation that could be accommodated in the FY23 budget. And the decision was made to leverage this year's Pay Act strategically to help bring people closer to their market wage. And certainly you can ask Arlene more about those details. The comp analyst was given the fiscal target that we set out, including the budgeted Pay Act, and used that to make recommendations about target market wage adjustments for each position across the branch. So now I'm going to ask Arlene to talk more with us about the outcome of this work and what she says as next steps for implementation in the context of really adopting this out-of-cycle wage policy. So let's try to get through Arlene's full presentation first, and then we'll go into questions and discussion. So thanks so much, Arlene. Really appreciate all your work on this. I know it has not been an easy lift because it has been so far long overdue. So I just thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Arlene Donovan, Legislative HR Director. Nice to see you all this afternoon. So I'm going to start with just a quick review to bring you up to speed as to where we are today since our last meeting with the compensation work. So as Senator Ballot mentioned, the compensation analyst has completed her work of the review of the job descriptions and everyone's resumes, all of their relative skills and experience as it relates to their current roles, all of the other comp factors that roll into all of this very extensive work. And that work has been completed now for all of the staff, including the directors and the supervisors and all of the seasonal staff as well. So that's been completed. She has also taken the structure provided to us by NCSL, and she has placed people into that structure according to their target market. And that's what we're calling it. That would be the target that the market would expect that person to be in. And the comp analyst has taken all of the information and has placed them within the structure relative to that target. So as you can imagine, some people will be under that target, some are on target, and some are over the target. It's important to keep in mind that in this process, that not everybody will receive a market adjustment. And I just want to emphasize that, because 33% of our staff ended up in this process being either on target or over their market target. So in those cases, those individuals will not receive an adjustment on their base wage, but I also want to make clear that they're not going to be decreased. That's a question that we're getting pretty often. So no one will have their salaries decreased in this process. So the recommendations that have been made by the comp analyst, keeping within that target fiscal guardrail and combined with the Budget Pay Act, brings 94% of our staff either at their target market, or some of those people are already above, as I just described. So 94% of the staff will at least be at their target market in this proposal, or they may fall above because that's where they already are. And the remaining come very close to their target market. They come within about 5% of their target. So given the fiscal parameters and all of this work, I am really pleased with that outcome. That's a significant accomplishment to get everybody as close to we possibly can to where they should be in the structure. One other thing that I just want to remind everyone of is that this is strictly a market-focused process. So it is not based on merit, which means it's not based on people's performance. It's not taking into consideration how hard people are working, how many hours they're putting into the session, and how great employees they are. This strictly is about market and people's skills and experience relevant to that target where they fall in the structure. So that's sort of the background as to where we are today. I think it might make the most sense to walk you quickly through the out-of-cycle wage adjustment policy. Again, we did this last time, so I will not spend a lot of time on it, but I'll walk you through the content and just know that there haven't been any changes since we met last. So the out-of-cycle wage adjustment policy, just as a reminder, will allow us to have an approval process to make wage adjustments that fall outside of the annual pay act increase that typically takes place over the summer in July. These are rare occurrences. They typically would happen if somebody changed jobs, took on different responsibilities, if they had a title change, something of that nature. Maybe there's an equity issue that we discover. So this process, if this policy is approved, would allow us to make those rare adjustments. So if I'm looking at the bottom of page 1, the out-of-cycle wage adjustment request talks about the process for making requests. And as a reminder, this policy really references and is only applicable to the chiefs of staff, those 2 positions, and to the legislative staff, with the exception of the House and Senate staff. So the hope would be that for those 2 offices, that a similar policy would be in place for them, because their salaries are determined and approved by those 2 committees. So any requests that would be brought forward for the legislative staff that this policy applies to would come through HR. And then together, myself and the director would look at all of the justification and the reasoning behind the request. I would confer with the chief fiscal officer from a budgetary perspective to make sure that it's within our budget boundaries, and to get this adjustment was warranted or not. And if it was, and we agreed, then we would process that adjustment. If for whatever reason we did not agree, then we would bring the recommendation to this committee, to Jlmc, and we would give you both sides of our perspectives and you would make the decision. In the cases of directors within the legislative branch, those wage adjustment recommendations would go to the applicable oversight committee who oversees those directors. So those would be determined in those various committees. I am looking now at page 2, and I am moving down. I'm 3/4 of the way down under out-of-cycle wage adjustments for the chief of staff positions. So for those 2 positions, any out-of-cycle wage adjustment recommendations would go to the speaker and the pro temp. They are the determiners of those 2 positions, but certainly human resources would be available if they wanted our guidance. And then the end of the policy just talks about some parameters. You know, certainly we would want to consider these types of adjustments on a case-by-case basis. We would want to remain within our structure that we are now hoping to work within. And it would be really important to maintain confidentiality because we don't want anyone to be promised anything without the approval being made first. And then the end of the policy just talks about how these adjustments would be processed, and HR would really be processing them through our office. So that is a review of the policy. And with that information, should the policy be adopted today, there are some anticipated next steps as it refers to this compensation process. So the next step would likely be that human resources would work with the compensation analyst and the directors to schedule individual meetings with those directors so that they can review the wage adjustment impacts to their individual staff members. I wouldn't anticipate that there would be too much discussion regarding changes because this is strictly market-based. So there may be a rare occasion where the comp analyst was not provided with accurate information regarding someone's relative experience, you know, for instance, that may change where they fall in the structure, but I would expect those to be rare occurrences. So we would schedule those meetings, and once those meetings took place, we would then work with the directors to find a block of time where we would have those discussions with the individual staff to let them know how and if they are impacted through this process. And I would really want those meetings to happen all at the same time so that people aren't getting information on one day and someone else is getting it a week later. So we would have to work within some parameters for those dates. Regarding any director adjustment and impacts there, so those recommendations would be forwarded to the chairs of each of their oversight committees. So Jlmc, House and Senate Rules, and Joint Fiscal. So they would be briefed on what those recommendations are and how those recommendations were made. And then once all of that work takes place, and I anticipate that the completion of this would be certainly after the session ends, then we would go ahead and process the adjustments through human resources, and those adjustments would take place separate from any pay act. So that is the update.
Thank you, Arlene.
You're
Really
welcome.
appreciate it. Representative Ansel.
Would the adjustments take place before the pay act adjustment? So the pay act would be on top of whatever the adjustments are. Is that the hope anyway?
Yes, that would be the
To
hope.
change the base. Okay.
Representative Leclerc.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions. One, this is out of cycle. What is in cycle? Is that
So in cycle, right now, the only adjustments that we have that are typically regular adjustments is the pay act that happens in July. So that's something that we typically see every July. So this would be something that falls outside of the pay act.
Okay, so we're talking specifically, just basically July would be considered the in cycle.
Yes, yeah.
One other couple of questions. Who is the chief or the fiscal officer on budgetary implications? Who is that?
That is Catherine Dunham.
Is that normal? That position would be the decider of this, or involved in that?
Well, I don't know that under this policy, I don't think that Catherine or this position would be the decider, the determining person. I think it would really be just in consultation with me to make sure that that it's within any budgetary constraints that we may have. And that is pretty typical, that the HR department would work with the fiscal office regarding budget, any budget restraints.
One other question, the out of cycle wage adjustments for chief of staff positions. I'm assuming there's a range that you folks would be working within.
We did get, that was part of the research done by NCSF.
I mean, it doesn't say that, but I'm
But I think-
assuming that's the understanding that,
Right, and that we would be bound to stay within the range. Is that
right, yeah.
And if there's, if you want language that is more explicit, happy to accommodate that.
Out in the public domain now.
Wonderful. Perfect.
I'm all good.
That's another way to do it. That's another way to do it.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions, comments, or clarifications needed before we vote to adopt?
Explained well, thank you.
So I'm looking for a motion to adopt the out-of-cycle wage adjustment policy for the legislative branch. Senator Mazza has moved. Any further discussion? Second, Senator Ansel, are we prepared to vote? All right, I will now call the roll. Madam Speaker,
Yes.
Senator Kitchell is absent. Senator Benning,
Yes.
Senator Mazza,
Yes.
Representative Ansel, Representative Colston,
Yes.
Representative Leclerc,
Yes.
and I vote in the affirmative. The vote is 7-0-1, and the motion passes. Arlene,
Thank you.
thank you. This
Good job.
has been something that I know all of us have cared about for a long time. I wish the previous speaker could be here to witness this. I know Representative Mitzi Johnson was also just dogged on this issue. So thank you, and thanks to the committee. Really appreciate us being able to do this right now. This meeting is adjourned.